Hello and welcome to the EdjSports Coach Rankings Show. I'm your host, Katie George. Be sure to follow EdjSports on all social media platforms. Those links are below this video. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe for EdjSports betting content each week, as well as our Coach Rankings Show. Joining me each week is Ian O'Connor, Senior Data Analyst here at EdjSports. All right, Week 18 is officially in the books. What'd you think of it?
It was exciting. A lot more exciting than I thought it was going to be. Got a couple games with teams sitting their starters, the Packers and the Bengals. Those really, weren't. Still ended up being a couple exciting games that were close. And then got some other ones. Washington and the Giants didn't really expect to really mean anything. The Panthers came out firing against the Buccaneers. Matt Rule, who we'll get to here in a little bit, a ton of fourth down decisions. Did a really good job. But it was really cool seeing San Francisco and Los Angeles, and then Arizona and Seattle. Obviously, those two games having a lot to do with each other, the Rams and Cardinals fighting for the NFC West. But there was a point where the 49ers scored to tie the game, and the Arizona Cardinals scored to tie the game, like within minutes of each other. And then Matt Stafford and Russell Wilson threw interceptions just a couple minutes later, within minutes of each other in each of those games. And then the Rams took the lead for good, as well as the Seahawks, again, just within minutes of each other. So watching Red Zone was awesome because you go one, and then it would shoot to another, especially with it being Week 18 and so much on the line. It was exciting all the way down to the last minute, as we know, the overtime between the Chargers and Raiders, with the almost tie that I think 90% of the league was rooting for, and fans, except for Steelers fans.
Well, I was going to say, the Colts allowed what many people thought were the impossible by losing to the Jacksonville Jaguars earlier in the day, setting up for a possible tie. And, of course, going into it, nobody thinks that is ever going to come down. And then, of course, it's 32-32. Yeah. It was unbelievably exciting.
And the Colts not just losing, but getting absolutely
destroyed.
Blown out, which we talked all week here, like, oh, that's not likely to happen, not likely. And then you mentioned the Raiders, at one point up 15 on the Chargers, and then you see it's a tie game. So pretty crazy.
Yeah, it was very fun. Great job by the NFL setting that up for the first ever 18-week season. Again, be sure to like this video and subscribe and follow EdjSports on Twitter and all other social media platforms so you can get in on the conversation. We have to start, Ian, with Black Monday and the coach firings that happened earlier this week. We've been building up to this each week with our hot seat segments, and we made arguments and talked about a number of coaches who have recently been let go. For those of you who don't know, so far, Denver has fired Vic Fangio. Minnesota has moved on from Mike Zimmer. Matt Nagy is out in Chicago. Brian Flores' time in Miami is over. And Joe Judge is no longer the Giants head coach. Urban Meyer, of course, did not even make it to the end of the regular season. Any of those names that I just mentioned stand out or surprised you when it was announced?
The biggest surprise to me was Brian Flores. I think that it seems like every year there's a surprise firing that people really don't see coming. And this one was one of those. I think, the Miami just had, I think it was last year, had a 10-win season, didn't make the playoffs because the AFC was so good last year. And then this year finished, I think, was it 9-8 maybe, but started off not too well. They lost 7 games in a row in the middle of the season, then went to win 6 or 7 in a row. But from what I've, heard and read here is maybe some players that he didn't get along with, and then Chris Greer and him, I think, butted heads quite a bit. So ended up not necessarily being an on-the-field thing, maybe a personality thing, which you kind of hate to see because Flores, it seemed like, was pretty promising, as well as him kind of being the reason that Deshaun Watson, from what I've seen, was interested in going to Miami, was because of Brian Flores as coach. So we'll see what happens there. Matt Nagy, not a surprise at all. Mike Zimmer, not a surprise. We covered him. Vic Fangio, maybe. I think it was last week we talked about him. Been there 3 years. The defense had been pretty good. Pretty much all 3 years as a defensive guy. He was, coming from Chicago with those really good defenses. And all they really need is a quarterback, it seems like, with that team. But at the same time, even if you get a quarterback, you're competing with the Justin Herbert and the Chargers, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, and even Derek Carr and the Raiders for the next 10 years. So
they got to sort that out.
Yeah, that's a tough one. We have Flores, I think, the biggest surprise. Joe Judge, not a surprise at all, especially if you all have been following along with us. He's not been one of our favorites over the last couple of years.
Yeah, but if you remember, 4 weeks ago when there were reports that they were going to retain Joe Judge, and obviously Daniel Jones, they said, was their future. And then they quickly changed their minds.
Even until, yesterday, Monday either. On Monday, they said he was expected to keep his job. Even yesterday, it came out late last night that he was let go. So
interesting stuff. Well, it appears 2 coaches that we mentioned also being on mild hot seats were Matt Rule and David Culley, and they're maintaining their positions for now. Rick Bisaccia is the biggest question mark moving forward since he wasn't hired as a head coach. But he's gotten his team into the playoffs in relief for John Gruden. We'll have to wait and see what happens once the Raiders' playoff run ends. And of course, Vegas fans are hoping that that's not until February 13th. So the hot topic now is potential replacements and for these positions. And let's look at some of the topic candidates for each vacancy based on some rumors and the Vegas lines. I want to know who stands out to you in terms of each vacancy. So for the Bears, you've got Brian Flores at plus 150, which would be interesting. I don't know how Chicago fans would feel about firing. Jim Harbaugh is a name that has been thrown out into the mix about possibly re-entering the NFL. Leslie Frazier and Brian Dable also round out names that the Bears are circulating. For the Broncos, Dan Quinn plus 200, Nathaniel Hackett plus 400, Jim Caldwell plus 750. Dolphins, Brian Dable, of course, his name has been floated for many of these vacancies, the OC currently for Buffalo. Doug Peterson, Eric Bieniemy, and then Kellen Moore. Jags, Bill O'Brien, just lost in the national championship with Alabama. That was
it's not something you hear often.
No, not at all. Brian Leftwich, former Jag QB. Jim Caldwell also up for that Jags job. And then for the Vikings, Eric Bieniemy, his name is at the front, OC for Kansas City. And then Brian Dable, of course, Brian Flores also in the mix for that one. Any of these names stand out to you in terms of who could go where?
Yeah, I think to me, Jim Harbaugh only being on the kind of the top of the list for Chicago is surprising. The recent news about him even being open to leaving Michigan is really surprising to me, considering the heights that they reached this year, making it to the college football playoff, had a great season. But I'm just, given his success in the NFL, we know what he did in San Francisco, taking them to the Super Bowl in the Harbaugh Bowl against his brother John and the Ravens. Really surprised he's not higher on some of these other teams except for Miami. So I know it came out this week with them firing Brian Flores, but owner Stephen Ross is a known Michigan man, said he's not going to take the best thing that Michigan football has going for him right now. Plucked him, but it doesn't mean another team won't.
Sure.
So really surprised for me not to see him a little bit higher. Maybe right now people aren't serious or the odds makers don't really think it's that serious that he'll leave based on what he's got at Michigan. But that one's surprising. Nathaniel Hackett not being higher for Jacksonville is pretty surprising. He was the OC there with Blake Bortles in 2017, took Jacksonville to the AFC Championship, nearly won that game, nearly beat New England to get to the Super Bowl. Selfishly would love to keep him in Green Bay as a Packers fan, but if he's got a head coach offer, especially in Jacksonville with a quarterback like Trevor Lawrence, that's got such potential, would be hard to say no to one of those. And then Eric Bieniemy isn't a surprise. I think this could be the year he finally gets a head coach job. Obviously, his name's been thrown around the last few years as well as Kansas City's been. They had their struggles this year offensively. A lot of that was due to turnovers. I don't think that's so much Bieniemy's fault. So I think this could be the year that he gets one. Yeah. So this could be the year for Bieniemy. You mentioned Dable as well with what he's done with Josh Allen since his first year coming in, helping out. The accuracy was the biggest kind of mark for Allen. He's gotten so much better. Regressed a little bit this year, but still has come a long way, and Dable is a big part of that.
Well, we'll have to see how these interviews go, and we'll be interested to see who gets hired and if anybody else gets fired as well in the meantime. And that will be a factor for next year's head coaching rankings.
And just to note, the betting lines for the Giants are not out yet. The firing just happened last night. They're looking for a GM as well, as Dave Gettleman retired in his second stint with the Giants. So it'll be interesting to see there. And some of the names rumored include Brian Dable, Jim Caldwell, who did well with the Colts and the Lions. But offensive-minded head coach, it seems, what they'll be looking for. Nathaniel Hackett is another one up there. But they've got a couple GM interviews today, I believe. So it'll be interesting to see. I would imagine they'd go for a GM first and then for the head coach, or maybe both of them together. So we'll see.
Well, to your point about Miami, you really want your head coach and your front office to be aligned. Yep. And obviously that's when you have falling outs when they're not. So hopefully they can get that sorted. Also, we want to remind you that we'll be here throughout the playoffs as we look forward to some great coaching matchups. And we'll also be hosting our end-of-season Coach Rankings award show. We'll be announcing a number of awards, including Coach of the Year, on February 9th ahead of the Super Bowl, so you'll want to make sure that you stick around for that.
He's decided to challenge his play. He has tossed down the red flag.
Alrighty, and it's time to throw some challenge flags. This is where we pick a coaching error from the previous week and we throw the red flag on them, challenging his decision. We'll explain why it was a bad call in terms of win probability maximization. Who are you calling out this week?
No surprise, it's going to be Joe Judge this week. We just
Don't pile on.
We were told he was going to retain his job. Came out last night. He's been fired. The decision I'm covering this week is so bad it's not even a fourth down decision. So we don't really have win probability numbers for it. But it's a decision that, along with some comments he made a week prior after their loss to Chicago, that kind of made him the talk of the league for a bit on Sunday until Brandon Staley happened on Sunday night, which we'll actually get to him in a little bit as well. But after the Week 17 loss, he said, hey, the Giants, we're not fist-fighting on our sidelines. We're not a clown show organization, which people assumed was a swipe at Washington football team.
Yes, it was.
After longtime teammates Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne got in a fight on the sideline, I think, against Dallas a couple weeks ago. So,
I would fight on that sideline if that was a score.
That was a rough game, but those guys played together at Alabama. Now they're together here. But this past week, facing Washington, so it was curious timing. He made those comments. He chose to call a QB sneak not only on 2nd and 11 from his own 2, but then again on 3rd and 9 from his own 4. So he defended the decision in the post-game press conference and didn't want what happened last week in Chicago. I think they had a punt blocked deep in their own territory, but came off a little aggressive defending his position post-game. I wonder if he kind of knew he was on the way out. Maybe if he'd been a little bit more aggressive or as aggressive on the field, their record would have been a little bit better this season. He might be keeping his job. Who knows? But he's now out. But yeah, this was a decision. I think people are still talking about it as kind of the nail in the coffin, I think, for his job.
Do you appreciate when coaches address certain decisions, high-stake decisions, in the post-game press conferences? We
do, especially, like I said, this one's a little bit different because it's not a fourth down, but ones where, especially Brandon Staley all year has defended his fourth down decisions. Like, a lot of times you see coaches come out and kind of second-guess themselves, but we like to see, the guys that kind of stick to their guns and defend it. The one that kind of comes up was from a few years ago. I think it was 2017. I was actually an intern here at the time, and Bruce Arians went for it on a fourth down. After the game, he was like, you know what, I don't second guess it. I would do it again. And we were like, that's awesome, because the numbers said he should have gone for it. The next day, Monday morning, he comes out and goes, you know what, I might not have done it the same. And we're here like, oh, what are you doing? Like, you had it right. But the coach, like Brandon Staley and others have done a really good job of really backing up their decision. Doug Peterson did it that same season a few years ago with some of his when the Eagles won the Super Bowl. So we love to see that.
Yeah. I'm going to throw my challenge flag on Bill Belichick. Obviously, he's one of the most conservative coaches in the league when it comes to going for it on fourth down. He had the great game against Buffalo, which you got excited about, but that appears to just be an outlier. So this week, New England had 4th and less than 1 at midfield. It was the end of the second quarter. They were trailing by 10. Clear go for it. They send Jones out there. He just tries to draw Miami offsides before getting called for a false start. Okay, well, after the penalty, it's now 4th and 5 at the 46. It's still a good option to go for it. Instead, he punts. And we know that Bill Belichick's always successful in the playoffs, but some of this is going to come down to high-stake decisions, and that makes me a little bit weary moving forward because he is so conservative in those moments.
Yeah, the one kind of good thing to take from it, I guess, would be you mentioned he had the great game versus Buffalo in what was a high-stakes game. Hopefully when it comes to it in the playoffs, he goes with that. But we saw him and Sean McVay in the Super Bowl a few years ago. Both kind of had a bunch of fourth down decisions where they, on 4th and shorts, punted, kicked field goals that we disagreed with. So he's one of those, it's kind of a wild card. To your point, you just never know what's going to happen.
We're not all about the bad here at Edge Sports. As you know, we love to give coaches credit when credit's due. So let's give out our Gold Whistle Awards of Week 18. A gold whistle goes to coaches that made a great call during their game. These will typically be under-the-radar decisions that miss out on our top 5, but still deserve some recognition. I'm going to go first, and I'm going to give it to Matt Nagy. I don't know if he'll appreciate this given the new news that he is out in Chicago, but he went for it 6 times on 4th down, 5 of those before desperation time. 4 4th and 1s and a 4th and 5, 0 4th down errors, which is very impressive. He gained 15% net win probability on the 4th down decisions. It was the best of Week 18, and I know people might think it's only because he had nothing to lose and this was likely his last game, but that's not the case. Nagy finished 3rd in our CCI rankings this year, has been very aggressive this season. He has been in a lot of situations where they're losing, but 7 of the 10 best decisions this season came while tied or leading, which is really impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. And you might think that they lost a lot of their games because he went for it on 4th downs, but that's not, that could be the case, but still he was definitely putting his team in the best position to win. It's unfortunate the rest of the coaching didn't work out for him.
Yeah, so they're moving on, and we can't wait to see who Chicago picks up. Who are you awarding the Gold Whistle to?
I'm going to go with someone who's the complete opposite of under-the-radar decisions. We normally do that, but I'm going to go with Brandon Staley, of course. You probably know which decision I'm talking about. 4th and 1, his own 18-yard line, 8:55 left in the third quarter, only down by 3 at this point. And it's been covered a ton since Sunday night. But just want to prop him up again here. We talked about it on our shows earlier in the week. It was our 5th best 4th down go of Week 18. It was a 4.7% increase in pre-snap win probability. The required conversion rate when doing a little bit deeper analysis on this was only 47%. Now, a 4th and 1, you typically expect to convert around 70% of the time, especially when you consider Los Angeles is they're number 3 in offense coming into this game in Football Outsiders DVOA. The Raiders were only 23rd in defense, so they're probably even a little bit higher than that, nearly 70%. But an interesting point here is the NFL Next Gen Stats actually tweeted out was able to determine the actual distance was 1.31 yards.
Oh, wow.
So we know not all first downs are the same. You've got a fourth downs. You've got 4th and inches that are converted obviously at a much higher rate, and then your long 4th and 1s. This one, again, 1.3 yards. NFL Next Gen Stats said that the Chargers had about a 59% chance to convert this. Again, considering their offense against the Raiders' defense, it's probably a little bit higher. But still, even if you just use that 59, it's still higher than the 47% required conversion rate. So it made sense to go here. It was still the right call, a pretty clear go. It's interesting that we're starting to see a shift in coaches being more aggressive. We still don't see it this far back in your own territory. Sure. But at the same time, earlier in the day, the Arizona Cardinals, no one really batted an eye at Cliff Kingsbury going for it. 4th and 1, his own 20 in the first quarter in a tie game. And you might say, because Arizona was already in the playoffs, they didn't have as much on the line, is what I saw a lot of people say. But they were still playing for a division. Like, there's a huge difference between winning your division and being a wild card team and having to go on the road. So, no one really said anything. Part of that was probably because it wasn't a primetime game of not everyone was watching that game. But Cliff Kingsbury did the exact same thing earlier in the day. It worked out, too. If Staley had converted this, I don't think we're talking about this decision at all.
So I'm curious, because so often good decisions and bad decisions that we discuss here surround 4th down situations. But also, we know earlier on in the year, we talked about some timeouts. Yep. Brandon Staley took a lot of heat for the timeout, when it was 32-32. Broadcast crew crushed him for it in that moment. I don't know if the defense wasn't set. Social media obviously crushed him for that moment. People assumed that Las Vegas was just going to run the clock out and tie so both teams get into the playoffs. But he calls that timeout. What did you make of the decision to call that timeout late like that? Yeah,
I thought the first thing I thought was that maybe the defense wasn't set. Like, you'd rather, not give up a touchdown to lose it when you still have a chance to tie and get into the playoffs. To your point earlier before we started recording was that maybe the offense, it gave them a chance to kind of reset. Even though they were going to run it anyway, it gave them a chance to kind of get together, regroup. And it looked like, too, that maybe Staley kind of thought too hard about it and maybe kind of messed things up. Had guys that may have been out of position on the second one that weren't able to get to make the tackle. But Chargers have really struggled to stop the run all year. They did it all night on Sunday. It seemed like Josh Jacobs was getting chunk gain after chunk gain. So I think they were still in position for a Daniel Carlson field goal. It would have only been about 57 yards if they gained nothing on that play, which isn't a guarantee, but he's been very good. I think they said he's been perfect in Vegas on late
8 of 8 or 9 of 9.
Now 9 of 9 on those late game field goals. So don't think it really had as big of an impact as other people are saying. And also, the difference between a tie and a loss, or a tie and a win for the Raiders, was either going to play Kansas City or going to play Cincinnati. And I think after they got absolutely drubbed like twice by Kansas City, they'd much rather play Cincinnati and get that win.
Lucky Pittsburgh. Lastly, let's pick our wild card weekend head-to-head coaching matchups that we're most looking forward to. At this point of the season, of course, we're looking forward to all coaching and team matchups. But we're going to pick this week the matchup that we're most looking forward to. So what matchup this week and wild card weekend are you eyeing?
For me, it's the AFC East matchup between New England and Buffalo. Their third meeting this year between these rivals. The last time they met was an absolute 4th down clinic. We covered it here. Each team went for it 4 times on 4th down, at least prior to the game being out of hand. New England, it was 4 times on 2 separate drives. They scored on both. The Buffalo Bills was 4 separate drives. They scored on 3 of those 4 drives. I think New England's was about a 13% increase in win probability on those 4th downs. Buffalo was about 9%, or those might be switched. Either way, it was just awesome to see, especially from Belichick, as you mentioned, who's been very conservative. One of the greatest coaches of all time, but it still seems to be I don't want to say afraid of going for it on fourth down, but more of the, I guess, trust your defense crew. And it's worked for him so many times with so many Super Bowls. So I guess that's kind of, he's going to stick with it. Sean McDermott, around the middle of the pack on the season in our CCI rankings, but has been really good the last quarter of the season, I'd say, going for it a lot. The Buffalo game against New England, then against Atlanta, and then even this past week against the Jets was pretty good. So expect to be another close one. Just can't wait to see who wins the rubber match in wildcard weekend.
Expects to also be a cold one because the temperatures currently are going to be in the single digits, but you know the little area on your app that says feels like? It's supposed to feel like -4 degrees when they kick off. And I know both teams are cold weather teams, are used to playing in it, but still, that's got to feel like you're being electrocuted every time you get hit.
I think even it might have been Aaron Rodgers, some of the Green Bay guys saying, we're used to the cold, but when it gets down to 5 to 0 degrees, below temperature, it is cold for everyone.
Yeah, I cannot imagine. Indoor sports, that's what I excel in. I'm going to throw it back to the 90s with my pick with San Francisco and Dallas when they were at their peak of their rivalry. Both coaches are in the bottom half of the league in CCI, but both are in the top 5 in EPI. A couple of the games this weekend might not be close, but this one is expected to be one of the closest of Super Wildcard weekend. So I'm excited to see how both coaches play it, considering their strong defenses are both in the top 7. These guys may try and play the field position game versus being aggressive, but I think it's going to be a really good one. And everyone you talked to, San Francisco was not the team that you wanted to draw just because they can run and gun. And so I'm excited to see how they play Dallas, considering Dallas is on a hot streak as of late.
Yeah, and Deebo Samuel can run it, he can catch it, he can throw it, and they might even send him out there to punt and kick field goals. Who knows?
But Jimmy Garoppolo obviously is going to have to be an X factor and do what we saw him do this past weekend with a really good drive. So we shall see. Another Coach Rankings in the books. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for your time. Follow EdjSports on all social media platforms, and like and subscribe to our YouTube page to get updates on our weekly Coach Ranking show, as well as in-depth betting analysis. Have a great day.